So this came across my attention the other day, and admittedly, the majority of these so-called non-violent groups that are rather unhappy in regards to the terror list that they've been placed on, I'm unfamiliar with. But one I did find rather laughable was Extinction Rebellion and their claim that they are non-violent or that they shouldn't be on this so-called terror list, going so far as to say their rights are apparently being violated. Non-violent groups on UK terror lists threaten legal action. Peaceful protests listed in a counter-terrorism guide used as part of an anti-extremist briefing are threatening legal action unless it is withdrawn. The Guardian revealed on Friday that Greenpeace, PETA, whatever, and other non-violent groups were listed alongside the proverbial neo-Nazis in the document used as part of training for PREVENT, the anti-radicalisation scheme designed to catch those at risk of committing terrorist violence. And I've heard multiple stories of people being branded as far-right and as neo-Nazis and being referred to this PREVENT programme for simply expressing an opinion that is deemed wrongthink in this day and age, such as not wanting to become a minority in your own country. That's a fatal mistake to have in this day and age. However, the guide from 2019 bears the local counter-terrorism policing on every page and was presented in briefings to public sector workers such as medical staff, yada yada. The groups listed say their rights have been violated and their inclusion in the guidance is unlawful and open to legal challenge. The groups behind the legal threat included Animal Aid, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and of course Extinction Rebellion. And today, in fact, peace groups and NGOs on anti-terror lists in Scotland, of course, Rainbow Unicorn Land, the peace campaigners and NGOs have demanded they are taken off a controversial terror watch list. Groups such as Animal Aid, PETA, Extinction Rebellion, Greenpeace and Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament were included alongside the far right. Never far left, you notice. Always the so-called far effing right. National action, yada yada. The guide published last summer by Terror Cops bears the logo Counter-Terrorism Policing. It's presented as a guide to help them identify and understand a range of organisations they might come across. When you come down here, this is where I find it rather comical to say the least. It goes on to say, Meanwhile, Dean Hayden of Counter-Terrorism Policing, which runs the PREVENT programme, said, "Why are Extinction Rebellion and other legitimate protest groups even mentioned in counter-terrorism policing documents in the first place?" Well, I don't know. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that, Extinction Rebellion isn't really about the climate. Yes, I know, the climate's breaking down, yada yada, but when we come down, he has this to say, this being, of course, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, although the real founders, are hidden hands, I would say. But nonetheless, he has this to say on multiple occasions, rhetoric akin to extremists, if ever I heard it. The climate's breakdown is a symptom of a toxic system that's infected the way we relate to each other as humans. This was exacerbated with European civilization, which spread around the globe through cruelty and violence, especially over the last 600 years of colonialism, although the roots of the infection go much further back. As Europeans spread their toxicity around the world, they brought torture, genocide, carnage and suffering to the ends of the earth. This guy clearly doesn't know his history very well, does he? The cultural myths justified the horrors, such as the idea that indigenous people were animals, and therefore God has given us dominion over them. This was used to justify a multi-continent-wide genocide of tens of millions of people. The fuck are you talking about? The coming of the scientific era saw this intensify as the world around us was increasingly seen as dead matter, just sitting there waiting for us to exploit and use it up. We're now using it up faster than ever. Alright. Euro-Americans violently imposed and taught dangerous delusions that they used to justify the exploitation and reinforced our dominance, while silencing worldviews that differed or challenged them. The UK's hand in this was enormous. It could be seen by the size of the British Empire and the dominance of the English language around the world. There is stark evidence that everyday racial bias continues in Britain. It's worth naming some of these constructed delusions that have been coded into society and institutions around the world. The delusion of white supremacy, The delusion of the patriarchy. Of course. The delusion of Eurocentrism, including the notion that Europeans know what is best for the world. I'd rather just be left the fuck alone without the diversity if it's all the same. The delusions of heterosexism, heteronormativity, propagate the idea that heterosexuality is normal and other expressions of sexuality are deviant. Well, the gay parades beg to differ on that one. The delusions of class hierarchy. Oh, there's that commie rhetoric coming out again, boy. And you're not extreme? They are other delusions, of course, like you. These delusions have become ingrained in all of us, taught to us from a very young age, said the communist. Now these delusions have ended, although some of the arguments that supported them have been dispelled. They continue to play out through each of us in our ways of relating, regardless of identity, yada yada. To focus on the climate's breakdown without focusing attention on these toxic delusions is a form of denial. Worse, it's racist and sexist. We need to decolonize ourselves. My ancestors are European, some of whom claimed to own people as slaves, and they weren't the only people that owned people as slaves. But you would know that if you studied proper history. There are black people with the name Bastien in the Americas, and I began to mobilize my white family to make contact, and you're good for you, pal. Good for you. However, my own accountability cannot be paid through this. The insanity of the mindset of the colonizer continues today, does it lie? It continues in deforestation and industrial agriculture. Oh, it's all our fault. It's all our fault. The community level and the theft of land, plunder and profit by largely European and US based banks. I'm not going to say anything on that one. Extinction Rebellion isn't about the climate, it's not even about climate justice, although that's important. If we only talk about the climate, we're missing the deeper problems plaguing our culture. Oh, we're plagued. And if we don't excise the cause of the infection, we can never hope to heal from it. So with all that in mind, that might be something to do with why they've been branded extreme for the time being. For how long that lasts, who knows? Perhaps it's got something to do with the fact that these Extinction Rebellion have been targeting children. But if you wish to find out more on that front, I suggest you check out UK Column, because they've done some rather insightful work when it comes to what these people are getting up to behind the scenes. They're not really the peaceful protesters that they're made out to be. Nonetheless, peace.